Can you hear us?
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
All right.
All right. Well, so first of all, thank you guys for coming out. We have a packed agenda for 45 minutes.
Right.
We're going to do a few things. We're going to talk about why training games are effective. We're going to talk about how you can map specific learning objectives and performance objectives to specific games. We're going to talk about different game building options as well as analytics tools and how you should be using them to hopefully make your games more effective. And probably the most important part is we're going to have some fun. So if you're not looking to have fun, I'd get out of here right now. So the one thing we ask is that you just don't be shy.
Right. So we're going to ask you some questions, and we're going to ask for some audience interaction. Like, so for example, this would be a question, and then you would say, so we would say, what's your favorite game? What are some of your favorite games? Stardew Valley, okay, great.
All right.
Skyrim.
Jeopardy!
Okay, woo! Zelda, yeah, great game. What was that? I'm not familiar with that game. Okay, so here's some of our favorite games. My favorite game of all time, Assassin's Creed, is missing. But all of these games, in one way or another, can be used as learning games, or elements of them can be used as learning. So we want to talk a little bit about how does that really happen, and how do you match the right game to the right learning outcomes that you're looking for. So one question I often get is, what's the difference between a game and play, right? So what makes something a game, so to speak? So I always say the difference is a goal. So if you're splashing around the swimming pool with a friend of yours, you're kind of playing around, it's a good time. As soon as your friend says, let's race to the other side, now you've got a game, right? And if you get out of the pool and run to the other side, you're cheating, right? You can't run, you got to swim.
But that might be a strategy.
That could be a strategy, that's right.
Cheating can be a strategy.
Right. Unwritten rules. But so games definitely have rules that you have to abide by. There's a game space that you play in. There can be strategies that you can do. So for example, in baseball, moving from swimming to the World Series baseball, the rules of baseball, 3 strikes you're out. You have to step on the bag to tag out the runner. Strategies could be bunting, shifting the outfield to a certain place, deciding what order to bat in. So that's strategy. Games have strategy that make you think. And then finally, games have a goal. And the goal is the most runs, or to win the game, or those kind of things. And most games have instructional goals, things that you want to learn, as well as game goals, what makes the game a winner or a loser. So all of these things go into what makes a game. And we think games are like the perfect marriage between
Sorry.
No, that's all right. Between kind of your brain power and games mixing together. So why is that? Well, one of the things is games are a safe playground to experiment, right? How do you know a game wants you to experiment? It has restart, right? Yeah, exactly. You have multiple lives, right? So you say, hey, I can burn 2 or 3 lives and I'm still okay, right? But think of most academic or learning situations. You get one chance and that's it. You're done. If you don't get it that one time, it's all over. But we know we learn from failure, so games are good for that. Games are active. We know that active learning is the best kind of learning. And finally, it adds to knowledge retention and higher gains of knowledge. So games add a lot of elements from a learning perspective. And some of these elements, this is a meta-analysis. So those of you who aren't research geeks like I am, a meta-analysis is a study of studies. So they looked at studies from 2000 to 2015, 63 different peer-reviewed studies. And some of the findings they found out that make games effective for learning are: 1, people expect to have fun with the learning game, so don't ignore or short shrift the fun part. Let the fun part happen, and then the learning can happen. Ideal, it would happen kind of stealthily. Now, I have to let you in on a secret. If your fellow employees are playing a game at work, they kind of know it's about learning, right? So you're not really hiding it from them. You're not really getting away with anything, but you don't want it to be so focused on the learning that you don't have any fun with the fun part. So you got to have fun. We're all human. Second, align gameplay with the performance objectives. So we're going to talk a little bit about how we can align certain game types with certain performance objectives, which is what you want to do. And then we also want the in-game experience has to drive the learning. So leaderboards are an awesome tool for driving learning. The great thing about a leaderboard is I don't have to describe to you what you need to do if you see a leaderboard. You know I need to be at the top of the leaderboard. So we don't have to spend a lot of time explaining what needs to be done, and that drives learning. The next one is a good game should increase in difficulty. If you play, for example, tic-tac-toe, and there's a way that you can win tic-tac-toe every time, it's no longer fun. But if you're playing World of Warcraft and you're trying to level up, that can be very interesting and very fun. So you want games to increase in difficulty as you use them. And then we also want games to provide in-game feedback. Games are awesome because they give you feedback instantaneously. Did I get the right answer or did I not? You know immediately. Where sometimes in classroom situations, you're like, or even e-learning, like, I think I got this concept, but I'm not really sure, right? So games allow you to kind of gain that knowledge of, yeah, I got it, or no, I don't quite have it. Yep. And then next, we'll look at games that create, you want to create a couple of things with the game. One is replayability. The ability to play a game over and over again is very helpful from a learning and repetition perspective. And you want to create a connection with the learners. You want the social aspects. Think about a game. When you sit down and play a game with your friends or with anyone that you might be playing a game with, there's instantly that social connection. You have a bond because you can talk about the same thing. You can kind of do the same thing. So games really work well when they connect you through the game playing process.
And I just want to double click on that because I think those two things go hand in hand. The reality is that there are a few mediums out there that you can use to actually really connect with your employees or your audience. And the storytelling and the interactive gameplay is unlike any other medium out there. So you're going to connect with them, and as a result, you're going to get them excited and motivated to continue to exceed their performance, potentially some of it's intrinsic motivation, some of it's extrinsic motivation, and as a result, you're going to get replayability. And there's one thing that I think any of us want is someone to master the content that we're trying to train. So what better way to get them to master it than give it to them in a way that they're going to want to engage with it heads down as over and over again until they've gotten to that tip. So that's all great, but the first question I think that we all should be asking ourselves is, should I even be creating a game? Because games sometimes are the right tool, sometimes they're not. So what we always do is we ask these questions. One is, what performance problem are we trying to solve for? Okay, so that's important to know, and then if we know that, what is the root of the problem? So for specifically, once we know the root of that problem, is there a particular skill set that we want to improve, right? I think often people will start with number 4, which is, hey, I want to create an X game. I want to create a Y game. Well, why? Let's back up all the way to the beginning and make sure it's the right tool for the problem you're trying to solve and the skill set you're trying to improve. So I always suggest that you start by looking at these 4 questions, and I think once you've done so, you ultimately will get to the right type of game if their game is appropriate anyway. So I love this next slide. Call this the taxonomy of gaming.
Whoops, going back.
Go back.
Did you all get it? Did you get it?
Yeah,
that's
hopefully you all got it. That was a game.
That's the game.
So this is actually something that Karl worked on several years ago. Allen Interactions has worked on over the years. Over the game agency, we worked on lately as well. And it's really just thinking about how do you align different performance objectives to the different types of game mechanics and different skill sets. And by the way, if anyone wants the slides, I'm happy to send them out to anybody. So feel free to take pictures, but I'm also happy to send them to you. But this is a cheat sheet, and quite honestly, it goes a lot deeper than this. But it's really important to think about what performance objective you're trying to solve for, and try to think about what skill sets align with that, and then on top of that, what gameplay might most effectively teach those skills to reach that performance objective.
Right, you don't want to misalign a game design strategy with what you're trying to teach. So for example, you're not going to use kind of a multiple choice kind of game to teach strategy. You need to keep resource allocation or a trade-off game more of a simulation for that kind of thing. So you want to be very deliberate in about how you match the game design with your learning objectives. If you just throw one kind of game at everything, And then you're going to wonder, well, games just don't work. Well, they don't work for this kind of learning, but that kind of game would have worked really well for maybe something over here. So you've really got to keep that in mind.
Okay, so last question I'm going to just pose before we start actually playing some games is why are training games so effective? Actually, maybe I'll ask, why does this thing not work? Okay, so, I hear a lot of people talk about this, especially over at Allen Interactions. They use this term over and over again, meaningful, motivational, and memorable, right? And I think that games so clearly map to those three things. So we'll talk about them one at a time. Meaningful, the nice thing about games is they really are an immersive experience where you can learn, you can engage, you can learn, you can engage, and you can perform on a much deeper level than any other training. And as a result, they're a lot more meaningful of experience to your user. Motivational, certainly they engage that audience. They're going to get that person to come back like Karl was talking about. You're going to get that person to try to master that skill, and they're going to have some sort of intrinsic motivation to really drive improvement over time. And the last one is memorable. And I think this is fantastic for two reasons. One, you're going to have someone remember that content as a result of playing through it that deeply. But more importantly, or sorry, equally importantly, you as a trainer are going to have access to so much analytics on that individual. What do they know? How do they behave? And you can use that to hone in on making your training that much more effective or improving individuals' performance.
Right, and I always talk about, the difference between a game designer and maybe an instructional designer is a game designer thinks action or activity first, an instructional designer thinks content first. And when you kind of switch your mindset to more of a game designer and what kind of game design works best in this learning situation, then you immediately match it up with the meaningfulness as well as, oh, I need to do this because I'm going to do this, and also motivation. Like if I do this better, it'll make my job better, it'll make me more efficient, it'll help the company or help the organization. And because it is a game and driving kind of that behavior, it's also very memorable because you remember that. So if you think about some of the your most memorable moments in your life, often they're involved in a game. Maybe it's a bad memory like your brother flips over Monopoly, or maybe it's a good memory, you finally beat your dad at chess, something like that. Games carry a lot of emotion, and we know from research that emotion can be tied to memory and tied to recall. So that's something that you want to think about as you're thinking about employing games.
All right, so we've talked about games. We're actually going to play some games. So a lot of the games that we build happen to be digital games. This very first game, just because of this group and where we are, is an analog game. And it's going to require everyone to pick one partner, someone sitting next to them. Here are the basic rules. The game is called Boom Shakalaka. So, first of all, going back to have fun, but here's what you got to do. Everyone needs to take a virtual set of cards, and you need to shuffle it up because I don't want anyone cheating. Okay, that was a joke. Never mind. All right, so you take your thank you. You take your virtual set of cards, you shuffle them up, and you look at your partner, and let's choose animals as our topic for today. So you're going to say 1, 2, 3, and you're going to say an animal, and I'm going to say an animal. And the goal is for us to get the same animal at the same time. We're going to do some recall skills, we're going to do some listening skills, we're going to do some memorization skills. As soon as you get that, I want your pair to stand up and as loud as you can, yell, Boom Shakalaka! All right? All right, everybody. Everyone, let's take a quick break and play this game.
So you want to try to get to the same animal.
All right. Oh, 2 Boom. Keep going, keep going. Come on, how many Boom Shakalakas can we get? Come on. Boom Shakalaka. All right. Boom Shakalaka. Boom Shakalaka. Boom Shakalaka. Boom Shakalaka. Oh, Boom Shakalaka.
Wait, I think they went twice.
Boom Shakalaka. All right.
All right. Woo. All right.
All right. So I always find that that's a really good example of a few key things. It's certainly using our listening skills. It's using memorization, recall. It also is just having some fun together, right? And that's what games are about. It's about connecting with each other, with the content, and really learning something, right? And so I think we saw patterns there. I think we memorized some stuff. I think we recalled some stuff. And hopefully, more importantly, we had fun along the way. Okay, we're going to talk about a few different game mechanics. You want to go through these, guys?
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about some different kind of games for different kind of learning. So the basic learning in any organization is memorization. So if you have any TLAs in your organization, 3-letter acronyms, okay, you guys don't have any, but okay, some organizations have acronyms for everything, and sometimes you can speak an entire paragraph and not really say anything to anybody outside your organization. So we have to do memorization. So here's a game where you're memorizing not only text, but in this particular case, visual memorization. So there's certain things in an operating room that you must pay attention to, and they must be at a certain state. And if they're not at a certain state, sometimes you can't even operate or must stop the operation, or you must remedy it very quickly. So we want people to be able to recognize this quickly, so this is a memorization game. So the more things you memorize, the better that it is for you as you go through that process. So the next one is comprehension. So, you know, I can recall something and not really understand or comprehend it. So judgment allows me to make judgments about what should I do. I get certain questions, I get certain setups, I get just enough information that I have to decide, is it this or is it that, right? So it's not really recalling, but it's a combination of recall and making some kind of intelligent cognitive choice about what the judgment should be. The third level is application or consequence, right? Games are great at consequences, right? If you play a game like Stratego, for example, which is basically capture the flag, sometimes you can put your flag right up front. The consequence is maybe your opponent's not thinking your flag's right up front, but it's the most vulnerable, so you have consequences. So here's a game where you're making choices, decisions in the game, and the decisions that you make branch to other consequences. So you allow the learner in real time to find out, oh, that was not a good thing to do, or yeah, that was an appropriate thing to do. In a lot of these cases, we use good, better, or best instead of a worst. So it's not that it's wrong. It's like, yeah, this is okay, but here's the consequence of this. But if you would have done this, you would have gotten a better consequence. So games are really good at teaching consequences, and especially shortening the time period of what the consequence would be. Next is strategy games. So a lot of business games are strategy games, right? You decide what to invest in, you decide what resources to allocate, you decide the trade-off. Games are really good at trade-offs, right? Should I do this or should I do that? And then what's the ramifications of one choice over another? So that's another level, a trade-off. And then finally, we have evaluation or synthesis. You get games maybe like sim games. You get games where you have to figure out, should I do this or this, and then which is better in this situation, right? Or which is the least harmful in this situation. One of the things games can do really well is put you in a difficult situation where in real life the results could be catastrophic, but in a game, not so catastrophic, right? You're not going to lose your job, or you're not going to blow up the minefield or whatever. You're going to live safely, but you're going to have a common experience to talk about, and that's the evaluation level. So when you think about different types of games, think about the different types of knowledge. There's also games that impact your affective domain, right? Your emotions and things like that. These are more on the cognitive kind of domain that we wanted to talk about, but there's lots of different ways games can impact your thinking. And then simulations work really well also because you get to put somebody in that situation and see how they do or how they behave. I was at Johns Hopkins Simulation Center years ago, and they have a life-size simulation, but they have medical standards, and they record every group that goes in there to see how you handled, for example, a code situation. So you could score yourself against the ideal way of handling a code situation. And the great thing about games is then you can throw in, okay, you did well here, but let's blow the fuse over here, so now you can't use the defibrillator, right? Or let's make the patient's mom come in and she's really upset, right? So you can add things like that to help people prepare for situations. So think about all these levels of games when you do that.
The one thing I'd add to this also is that if you look at all these different game types, simulations is actually kind of, in my mind, can often be a hold everything, right? You can take a lot of those different mechanics, which is what I call them, and you can put them into simulations because within a deeper simulation, you're going to want to try different techniques at different times, right? And that's just going down a path and really trying to, in a virtual world, to try something much deeper.
Right, and the other cool thing about this is if you think about a learning journey that learners go on, you can bring them from knowledge level all the way to the evaluation level using different types or series of games. And the good thing is, and the thing that you have to remember is games are best when they're embedded into a larger curriculum, right? They're not over here by themselves, they're part of the learning process. So sometimes we like separate games over here and like learning over here. It really needs to be interconnected so that you can get the most optimal outcome.
And by the way, that interconnection can be done one of a few ways. You could do something incredibly immersive like this that's very story-driven and actually have someone guided through an entire virtual experience, or you could say, you know what, I'm going to stick with my traditional training of using Captivate or Storyline, but I'm going to weave different games throughout that course, right? Not at the end, not as a quiz or an assessment, but I'm going to use this as different checkpoints to make sure someone understands or people understand key concepts. And that's when it's most effective, is when you can really tie it to individual concepts along the way.
Yep, exactly. There's actually research that underscores how that works. So the research shows games are best when they're embedded in a curriculum rather than kind of at the end or standalone.
So one of the things we talk about is games are great, but data is really critical, right? And so I always point to Candy Crush. Candy Crush makes nearly $600,000 a day off of their consumers. And the reason they're making that money off their consumers is because they're data mining. They're looking at how people are playing their games, and they're changing little things along the way. And gosh, while I know that none of us are going to make $600,000 a day, actually I hope we do, at the same time, one of the things I think we can and should be doing is we should be looking at the data and how people are playing our training games, what they know, what their behaviors are, and we should make edits along the way to make sure that it's that much more effective. And we can do that. So all the games that I showed as just images as Karl was going through those different categories are a tool that we have, and there are lots of tools out there, but I'll talk about ours, called the Training Arcade. The Training Arcade, you can build these web-based games, you can change them real time, day in and day out, and you can address different needs of your employees or your audience. So I want to talk a little about the data that you can collect. We'll jump over to...
So as he's talking about this, one of the really exciting things that's happened in the last few years is the ability of the tools for learning to be tied to data. So instead of waiting till the end of a course to find out how everybody's doing, you tie these tools into the data on the back end, and you can tell in real time, are people getting this concept? Are people applying this correctly? Is this not working? So you're able to make adjustments and adaptations as you go on. So the data really becomes really important and really critical. And at this point, I'm going to turn it completely over to Stephen. I have a 3 o'clock presentation at St. Thomas A. So I got to go and get set up and everything. I was free all morning, and I'm free after that presentation, but for some reason they smacked these two things together. So thanks for your time and attention, but I'll finish up for us.
So what you're looking at here is a data analytics dashboard. And I think that thinking about your games beyond just the gameplay, but really thinking about how is someone engaging with this material? What do they know, and what are the behavioral trends? We just did a study using 700 games, and we saw a 64% lift between the first attempt and the third attempt. And this was on average about a 6-minute gameplay. So a relatively low engagement, right, that someone is spending with your content, but they're doing it over and over again in a very, very refined environment, and they're growing their knowledge very quickly as a result of that. It's all about how do you deliver the game and how do you deliver corrective feedback and making sure that those two go hand in hand. But you can look at quickly the data on the individual. What you're looking at here is one individual and how they answered questions and how they answered questions each way. You're also looking at how many attempts they played the game. But also I think it's important to look at the individual questions themselves. So when you look at an individual question, say, gosh, what percentage of people are getting this right? And if they're getting it wrong, what are they answering? How do we use this, whether in an ILT environment where we can step back real time and say to the group, gosh, I noticed that 60% of the people in this room didn't understand this. Let's take a moment and talk about it, right? Or you're able to use it as a pre-assessment and make sure that you can build content that's going to be most relevant based on what people know. So data, in my mind, is absolutely king, and I think essential to making sure that your presentation, your content is most effective. There we go. All right. I'm happy to show you guys, we have a tool that's called the Training Arcade. We're at booth 628. You can create games yourselves in 15, 30 minutes. You can also analyze them super easily, and I encourage you to give it a shot. We have 100 plus companies that are here using it right now, and it's really an effective tool. But if you have any questions about that, about sort of what we presented, Karl and I are both available to answer anything along the way. So it's all web-based, yep. So yeah, thank you guys very much. I appreciate it.